Welcome to WebGoat's A1 Broken Access Control, where today we're going to be hijacking a session. If you click into the module, you can see that the base concept is that many application developers forget to include proper complexity when creating session-based token IDs. So let's just get started on the attack. After reading the text here, we can see that it's telling us to try to predict the hijack cookie of a different user's session. So let's start by opening up our burp interceptor and turning on the intercept option. Now if we go back to WebGoat and hit the access button, we can go back to burp and then find the request we're looking for by hitting forward a couple of times. In this case, we're looking for the login endpoint. If you already have a hijack cookie value here, delete it. That will mess up what you're doing later. So now that you don't have a hijack cookie, we need to request a new one from the server. To do that, we can forward this request to the repeater and then turn off intercept. So now over here in the repeater tab, if you hit send, you can see a new hijack cookie in the response. So let's demonstrate real quick what happens if you request multiple hijack cookies in a row. Now if you're paying attention closely, you'll notice that every couple of requests, these two numbers here actually go up by 2 instead of 1. This means that between our two requests, another user has authenticated, and the result is that now we're able to know the session number of that other user. According to the hints, we already know that the second number is a Unix timestamp. Knowing these two things, we now have our method of attack. We can run a sequencer to get a jump by 2 in the first value, say 57 to 59, and then we know that our session ID is actually going to be 58. The second part, which requires some scripting, is going to be the timestamp, because we're going to have to brute force guessing each timestamp in between our two requests. Now the reason behind why this works is that we already know the user's session ID, and since we logged in both immediately before them and immediately after them, we know that their timestamp has to exist somewhere within the range of our two requests. So now that we've talked about the theory, let's try this in practice. In this example, I'm using VS Code, but you can use your favorite text editor or IDE in place of it. Start by creating a new bash file and then creating variables for your username, password, and JSession ID for WebGoat. To find your JSession ID, go into WebGoat on your browser, right-click, click Inspect. From there you can go to the Application tab, and then you can go to Cookies and then Localhost. What you're looking for here is the value of the JSession ID cookie. Copy and paste that into your script. I'm also going to create some variables for use within the script for the session found ID, the start and end time of the session that we find, the current session ID, the previous session ID, and then the current session and previous session timestamps. While these two echo lines don't actually matter for the script, they are pretty nice to have as they keep your terminal organized. Now let's create a loop between 1 and 1000. Now inside of this loop, we're going to create a curl request, and it's going to be of type post. It's going to point towards the login endpoint that we were just requesting in burp, and it's going to take username and password as parameters. We're also going to give it the cookie header, and that's going to be the JSession ID equal to our JSession ID variable. Then you need to cast it into the standard output and grep the line that has the hijack cookie. Now that you have that line, you need to remove the set cookie title of that header. With these last two fields, we're just cutting off the beginning and end of the string and then grabbing the token from actually in between. Now that we have the whole command written out, you can surround it in parentheses, put a $sign before it, and surround that whole thing in quotes. This turns it into an output. What I did here is I created a new variable called current session, and I set it equal to this whole command's output. Now I have a full sessions hijack cookie saved into this variable. So I can cut it in half using the dash as a delimiter, and I can grab the ID from the first half and the timestamp from the second half. Now we can create an if statement, and this is going to see first if the previous session ID is blank. If it is, then it's going to check if the current session ID minus the previous session ID is equal to 2. The reason that's important is because if it is, then we know that it skipped over a session ID and we have now the value of someone's session. Because we now know what the session ID is of someone else's session, we can just take the session before that and add 1 to get their session ID. For use in the next loop that we're going to create, we're going to set the session found start time to the previous one before it, and the session found end time to the one after it, and then a break statement to stop the loop. Now if none of that is actually true, it will not have run the if statement, therefore it will not have hit the break statement, meaning that it will run the loop again. So we can now set the previous session's ID and timestamp to the current session's timestamp and rerun the loop. So let's recap what this loop is doing before I move on. It's grabbing a hijack cookie from WebGoat, and then it's setting the current session's ID and timestamp to those of the hijack cookie we receive. It's then going to make sure that the previous session's ID is not blank. So if you have a previous session ID, then it's going to move on to the next step. In the next step, it's going to subtract the current session's ID from the previous session's ID. If that's equal to 2, then we know that someone else authenticated between those two requests. So it's going to set the session found's ID, start and end time, to values based on those. If none of that ends up being true, then it's going to set the previous session ID and timestamp to the values of the current session's ID and timestamp, and then it's going to run the loop again. Once it finds a session, it's going to break, therefore stopping the loop and moving on to the next part of the code. I'm going to put some echo statements to let us know that it's found a session, and then we're going to create a new loop that starts at the beginning timestamp and ends at the end timestamp. And this %1.0f just makes sure that it's not a decimal number and that it stays as a whole number. In this new loop, it's going to try the found session ID for every single timestamp in between the previous and next session timestamp, and then it's going to echo the response. So let's run it and see what happens. Make sure you save this as a bash script or .sh somewhere on your computer that it can be accessed later. Now open up your terminal and navigate to the directory in which you saved the bash file. Then type in the command sh space the file name that you saved it as. Once you run the script, you'll see a lot of responses. Look for the one that says congratulations, you successfully completed the assignment. The hijack cookie to the left of it is your answer. And that, my friends, is how you hijack a session using an insecure authentication cookie. Thank you for watching.